I turned 63 last October, and my daughter baked me a lemon cake with too much frosting and not enough candles, and we sat on the back porch of my house in Knoxville and watched the sun go down over the ridge. It was a good night, a quiet night, the kind I had learned, after everything, to be grateful for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is not important. What matters is the story, and the story starts about 14 months ago when I met a woman named Cheryl at a church potluck in Maryville. I want to be honest about something before I go any further. When I walked into that fellowship hall, I was not looking for anyone. My wife, Donna, had passed away 4 years earlier from pancreatic cancer, and the grief of that, the particular, slow, suffocating grief of watching someone you built your entire adult life around just quietly disappear, does not go away on a schedule. I had learned to live around it the way you learn to walk around a piece of furniture in the dark. You know it's there. You stop bumping into it as hard, but you never forget it's there. My daughter Hannah had been gently pushing me to get out of the house more. She lived 20 minutes away with her husband and my 2 grandkids, and she checked on me more than she should have needed to. She was the one who told me about the potluck. Said the church had a Tuesday evening thing for the over 50s crowd, not just Sunday services. I told her I wasn't in the market for Bible study and casserole. She said, "Dad, just go. Eat something someone else cooked for once." So I went. The fellowship hall smelled like someone had brought 3 separate green bean dishes, and they were all fighting for dominance. I found a spot near the back with a plate of food I barely tasted, and I was honestly counting the minutes until I could leave without seeming rude, when the woman sitting 2 seats down leaned over and said, in a completely flat voice, "The mac and cheese is the only thing worth eating here. I've been coming for 6 months, trust me." I looked at her. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, I guessed, dark hair going silver at the temples. Nice face, sharp eyes. She was holding her fork like she was prepared to defend her opinion if challenged. I looked down at my plate. I had not taken any mac and cheese. "I'll remember that for next time," I said. She said her name was Cheryl. She said she had moved to Maryville 2 years ago from Atlanta to be closer to her son, who was 22 and studying at the University of Tennessee. She was warm and funny, and she had strong opinions about things, and talking to her was easy in a way I had not expected. Talking to anyone to be easy again. I did not ask her out that night. I went home, sat in my kitchen with a glass of water, and had a long internal argument with myself about whether I was a person who was allowed to feel interested in someone again. I decided I was. It took me about 3 weeks to actually call her. We had coffee, then dinner, then more dinners. Over the following months, she became a regular part of my life in the way that felt both surprising and, eventually, natural. She was careful with me, and I was careful with her, and we talked about everything. Our kids, our histories, what we wanted from whatever years we had left. There was one thing I did not tell her, though. Not right away. Not for a long time, actually. I had spent 31 years in the HVAC industry. The last 18 running my own company, Rollins Comfort Systems. We had 43 employees at our peak. Residential and commercial contracts across 3 counties, and a reputation I had built from nothing with my own hands and my own name. When I sold the business 5 years ago, the year before Donna got sick, I did well. Very well. I also owned the house outright, had a commercial building I rented to a physical therapy practice, and had investments my financial advisor managed quietly and carefully. I never told Cheryl any of that. Not the details, anyway. I let her believe I was comfortably retired, former business owner, getting by on savings and a decent pension, which was true. It just was not the whole truth. Why did I hide it? I had watched too many people in my circle get taken apart after their spouses died. A man I had known for 20 years, a good man, had remarried at 67 and spent the next 3 years being quietly drained by a woman who turned out to have significant debt she had never disclosed. He lost his lake house. He lost his dignity. He told me once, after the divorce was final, I should have known when she started asking about the accounts before she even knew my middle name. I was not planning to be that man. Cheryl never pushed for financial details. She never asked pointed questions about what I owned or what things were worth. She seemed genuinely not interested in money as a topic, which, looking back, I found reassuring. She drove a practical car. She split checks with me more often than not. She never once made me feel like I owed her something. Hannah met her in the spring and liked her. My son-in-law Greg was more measured. He said she seemed nice, which coming from Greg means he was withholding judgment. My old friend Terrence, who had known me since we were in our 30s, said I looked like myself again for the first time in years. I took that as a good sign. In June, I proposed. It was not an elaborate proposal. We were on the back porch, my porch, in Knoxville, and the weather was just starting to loosen into summer, and I told her I did not want to waste time being cautious when I knew what I felt. She said yes before I finished the sentence. We were married in August. Small ceremony. Anna was there. Greg was there. Terrence was there. Cheryl's son, who I will call her son throughout this because that is how I still think of him, flew in from Knoxville. He was living in Nashville by then, had graduated in May. He shook my hand and called me by my first name and smiled at his mother. And I thought, this is fine. This is a family being built piece by piece. Give it time. The reception was at my house. We had catering, good music, cold beer. It was one of the better days I had had in years, and I went to sleep that night genuinely happy. I was happy for approximately 36 hours. It started the next evening. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. I had cooked, which I enjoy, nothing fancy, just a good roast chicken, and Cheryl set down her fork and said in a tone I had never heard her use before, "I've been thinking about the house." I said, "What about it?" She said she felt it was time to talk seriously about our finances as a married couple. She said she had been thinking about it for a while, and now that we were married, it made sense to lay everything out clearly. She said she wanted to understand the full picture. I kept my face neutral. "Sure," I said. "What do you want to know?" What she wanted to know, it turned out, was quite a lot. She asked about the value of the house. She asked about the value of the house. She asked whether I still own the commercial property. She asked whether my financial accounts were in my name only or whether they would be considered marital assets. She used the phrase marital assets 3 times in about 8 minutes, which was 3 times more than it had ever come up in the 8 months we had been together. I told her I would be happy to talk through all of that I believed in transparency between married people, but that I wanted a few days to get organized so I could present things clearly. She said that was reasonable. She was smiling. Everything on the surface was perfectly reasonable, but something had shifted in the room, and I felt it the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. I called Terrence the next morning. He listened without interrupting, which is one of his better qualities. When I finished, he said, "What did she know about the commercial property before last night?" I said, "I'd mentioned I owned a building I rented out, nothing specific." He said, "And the investments?" I said, "She knew I was comfortable. She did not know the numbers." There was a pause. Then Terrence said, "You said she used the phrase marital assets." I said, "Yes." He said, "That's a legal term, not a kitchen table term. Somebody coached her, or she coached herself. Either way, that's not a new bride question. That's a strategy." I did not want to believe that. I want to be clear about that. I did not want to believe that the woman I had just married had been running a calculation I wasn't aware of. I pushed back. I said maybe she was just being responsible. I said maybe I was being paranoid. I said Donna's death had made me suspicious of things that did not deserve suspicion. Terrence listened to all of that and then said, "Maybe, but call your attorney before you tell her anything else." I called my attorney, Beverly, that afternoon. She is a woman who has handled my business affairs for 12 years and does not traffic in alarm or drama, which is why I trusted her assessment when she said, quietly and without any editorializing, "Do not disclose asset details to a spouse of less than 72 hours without understanding what you're signing up for. Let me do some checking first." I asked what kind of checking. She said she had a contact who did background and financial screening. She said it would take 3 or 4 days and cost me a few $100s, and I should act normal in the meantime. Acting normal in the meantime was the hardest part. Cheryl was cheerful over the following days, affectionate. She made breakfast twice, which she had never done before at my house. She suggested we redecorate the guest room. Her son might want to come stay for extended periods, she said, now that he was family. I said that sounded nice. I said we had plenty of time to think about it. On the third evening, her son called. I was in the living room reading, and she stepped into the kitchen to take it. But the house is not large, and her voice carries when she forgets to modulate it, which she did. I did not mean to listen, but I heard her say, "He hasn't told me the full numbers yet." And then, after a pause, I know, just be patient, these things take time." I sat very still with my book open in my lap, and I did not turn a page for a very long time. Beverly called me the next afternoon. She did not bury the lead. Cheryl had filed for bankruptcy in Georgia 11 years ago. She had defaulted on a joint mortgage with her previous husband. Not a divorce, not a loss. A deliberate walkaway. She had 2 unresolved civil judgments against her from contractors, relatively modest sums. But the pattern was there. Her son had a student loan situation that was not simple, and 3 weeks before our wedding, 3 weeks, Cheryl had consulted with a family law attorney in Nashville. Beverly had not been able to confirm the subject of that consultation, but the timing was, as Beverly put it, not nothing. I thanked Beverly and sat alone in my truck in the parking lot of a hardware store for about 20 minutes. I thought about Donna. I thought about what she would have made of all this. Donna was practical in the way that people who grew up without much tend to be practical. She did not waste sentiment on things that did not deserve it, but she also gave people real chances before she made up her mind. I think she would have looked at the situation and said, quietly, "Baby, she told you who she was. You just weren't listening." I drove home. That evening I told Cheryl I was ready to talk through the finances. I suggested we sit at the kitchen table. She sat across from me with an expression I can only describe as carefully relaxed, the look of someone who has rehearsed being casual. I told her the house was in my name and had been for 22 years. I told her the commercial building was held in an LLC that I was the sole member of, established before our marriage. I told her my investment accounts were in my name only, and had been for over a decade. I told her I was fully aware of Tennessee's marital property statutes, which treat assets acquired before marriage as separate property, and that I had spoken with my attorney about how our finances were structured. Her expression did not change immediately. There was a 3-second delay, like a satellite call, and then something behind her eyes shifted. She said, "I wasn't asking about legal structures. I was asking because we're married, and I think married people should be open." I said, "I agree, and I'm being completely open. This is the picture." She said, "But if something happened to you," I said, "my estate is handled through a trust that was established before we met. Hannah is the primary beneficiary. I am happy to show you a copy of that document." Another pause. Longer this time. She said slowly, "You planned all of this before we even got married." I said, "I planned all of this before we even met. I've been managing these assets for 20 years. The planning didn't change when we got married. It just became relevant to tell you about. What happened next I will try to describe accurately, because I want to be fair." She did not yell. She did not throw anything. She became very quiet in the way that is somehow louder than noise, and she said that she felt deceived, that I had not been honest about my situation, that she had entered this marriage without a clear understanding of what the arrangement actually was. I said I did not know what arrangement she had expected. She said she thought as my husband I would want to take care of her properly. I asked what properly meant. She said it meant she should be on the deed to the house. It meant her son should have some security going forward. It meant that a man who had all of this should want to share it with his wife. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the potluck. I thought about the mac and cheese and the easy laughter and all the dinners in between. I thought about how well she had played the part of someone who did not care about money. I said, "I think we need to talk to a counselor." She said, "I think we need to talk to an attorney," which told me everything. I called Beverly again the next morning. Within 2 weeks of our wedding, my new wife had retained a divorce attorney. Beverly said it appeared Cheryl was planning to file on grounds of fraudulent concealment, the argument being that I had misled her about my financial status before marriage. Beverly said that argument had essentially no legal merit in Tennessee given the facts, but that it was clearly intended to create leverage for a negotiated settlement. There was no settlement. I am going to say that plainly, because I know some people would have given her something just to make it go away. My attorney advised against it, and I agreed with my attorney. Cheryl's claim had no legal foundation. She had not been deceived about anything actionable. She had been disappointed that her plan had not worked. Those are different things. The divorce was finalized in December. It was, from a legal standpoint, relatively straightforward. Cheryl retained what she brought into the marriage, which was not much. I retained everything that was mine. Her attorney tried twice to argue for a share of the rental income generated during our 4 months of marriage. Beverly dispatched both attempts efficiently. Cheryl left Knoxville shortly after. Her son moved back in with her, from what I heard through the church grapevine, though I stopped attending that Tuesday evening group. Hannah came over the night the paperwork was finalized. She brought a bottle of the good bourbon and 2 glasses, and we sat on the back porch the same way we had on my birthday, watching the dark come in over the ridge. She said, "How are you really?" I thought about it honestly before I answered, which is something I try to do now. I told her I felt embarrassed, which was true. I told her I felt grateful, which was truer. And I told her that the thing I kept coming back to was not the betrayal, exactly, but the way the whole experience had clarified something I had been soft about for a long time. Hannah asked what that was. I said, trusting the people who have actually shown up for me, not the people who showed up with a plan. The people who showed up because they wanted to be there. She topped off my glass without saying anything, and we sat out there until the fireflies came on in the tree line, and I thought about Donna, and I thought about Terrence, and I thought about Beverly, and I thought about my grandkids asleep 20 minutes down the road, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like everything that mattered was still intact. I am not sharing the story because I want sympathy. I am sharing it because I know there are people listening to this right now who are in the same place I was. You've been through something hard. You started to feel like yourself again. And someone came along who seemed warm and real and easy, and you are starting to wonder whether the thing you feel is the thing it appears to be. My advice is not to stop trusting people. My advice is to watch what someone does when they don't get what they want. That is the only test that matters. Everything before that is a performance. And some people are very, very good at performing. Protect what you have built, not out of fear, not out of coldness, but because the people who will come after you, your children, your grandchildren, the people who loved you through the hard years, they deserve to know that what you built together is safe. My daughter makes a lemon cake with too much frosting. She checks on me more than she should have to. She brought good bourbon when I needed it without me asking. That is what showing up looks like. Anything else is just a conversation at a potluck. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since all this ended. Not in any formal way. I am not a philosopher and I never finished more than 2 semesters of college. But I have lived long enough to understand that most of what happens to us is not random. It follows from choices. From the small ones especially, the ones we make quietly, the ones nobody sees. Cheryl made a choice to walk into a marriage with a plan that had nothing to do with me as a person. That choice set everything else in motion, and the thing about a plan built on deception is that it requires the other person to cooperate. It requires you to be unaware or trusting past the point of reason, or too lonely to look clearly at what is in front of you. I almost cooperated. I want to be honest about that. There were moments, even after Terrence said what he said, even after Beverly told me what she found, where part of me wanted to believe I was wrong. Because it is easier to be wrong than to accept that someone sat across from you at dinner for 8 months and performed warmth like it was a job that takes something from you, even when you catch it in time. But here is what I came back to, and what I think matters. I had done the work before any of this happened. Not because I suspected Cheryl. Not because I was cynical, but because I had watched good people lose what they spent their lives building, and I had decided that protecting what Donna and I had built together was an act of respect. To her memory, to Hannah, to myself, the trust, the LLC, the conversations with Beverly. None of that was about distrust. It was about integrity. About taking seriously the responsibility of being the steward of something that mattered. That preparation did not make me cold. It made me free. When the moment came where Cheryl showed me who she actually was, I was not scrambling. I was not desperate. I could stand on solid ground and look at the situation clearly because the foundation was already there. Terrence showed me what real loyalty looks like. He asked the right question when I needed it most, not the comfortable one. Beverly showed me what competence in service of someone's actual interests looks like. And Hannah, who is probably worried about me more than I ever deserved, showed me that the people who love you do not arrive with conditions attached. They just show up, again and again, without keeping score. I think about the people listening to this who are somewhere in the middle of something similar. Maybe you are not sure what you are seeing yet. Maybe you are telling yourself you are being paranoid. Maybe you are lonely enough that the warning signs feel like obstacles to something you have been waiting for. My honest advice is this: do not confuse someone's patience with virtue. Patience is easy when you are waiting for something. Watch what happens when they realize they are not going to get it. That moment, that single unguarded moment, will tell you everything you spent months trying to figure out. Protect what you built. Stay close to the people who knew you before, and trust yourself enough to act on what you already know.